how can you use refs in React.js to gain access to DOM nodes or HTML elements? Well, that's what we're going to cover in this video. And then towards the end of this video, we're going to cover a kind of word of caution when it comes to using refs in React. But the example that we're going to use here today is we have this section element. I've gained access to this element using refs, and then we're going to call that element dot scroll into view when we click on this button here. So as you can see, I click this button and it scrolls this element into view. Now, this is just one example of using refs to gain access to an element. There's several different things that you might use this for, but this just kind of goes to show how you might use refs with your DOM elements. So let's actually look at the code for this. It is pretty straightforward here. In my previous video, I go over kind of an overview of how to use refs and an example of doing so and additional kind of words of caution with using refs. But here, what we do is we just call the useRef hook. We add our type annotation here because I am using TypeScript here. And then we give it an initial value of null. That's going to return into section ref here an object with a current property. Now, the kind of key here to using this on HTML elements is that for your element, you can add an attribute that is called ref. And then you can set your variable containing your ref to that element. So here on the section that we want to scroll into view, I just say ref is equal to section ref, which matches my section ref constant here. That is the return value of calling the useRef hook. So useRef returns an object with a current property, and then we set for our section element, ref is equal to section ref. But if we wanted to kind of track this P element, this DOM node, we could totally do that as well. And we would just say ref is equal to, instead of section ref, we might say para ref for paragraph ref or something like that. So you can set a ref attribute on your different elements. And that is basically going to mean that your current property is now going to represent this section DOM node here. So we can see I'm console logging my section ref right here at the top of the page. So if we come back and I open my console, we can see I'm console logging it here. It's an object with a current property, and you can see it is an HTML element. It is a section.h96 background gray 700. And you can see when I hover over it, my inspector highlights it here on the page because this ref is representing this HTML element, which means we have access to all this HTML elements, properties and values and methods that we can use. So you can see it has the inner text. You have reached the target section. You have reached the target section. So this just gives us access to this direct HTML element. So then quite simply, when I want to click on this button that says scroll to section, we pass in handle scroll. And then all I do here is I do a quick check to make sure that the section ref.current exists and it is an element. But then we just do section ref.current. So this represents the HTML element here. And then HTML elements will have a scroll into view method. And then we call that method, and then we just pass a behavior of smooth to kind of customize how it scrolls there. And that is exactly how we get this effect right here. So pretty straightforward when it comes to using refs with elements within your application. You just use the useRef hook like you normally would. And then for whatever element that you want to use or that you want to track, all you're going to do is use a ref attribute on that element and then set that equal to your ref variable returned from the useRef hook. And then that will give you access to that element. Now, of course, you could use this for different things, but let's kind of go over that word of caution that I mentioned earlier. And that is avoid changing DOM nodes managed by React. Modify adding children to or removing children from elements that are managed by React can lead to inconsistent visual results or crashes. And they showed an example here as well. I'll link this if you want to read kind of more about this, but it does say that it doesn't mean you can't do it at all. It just requires caution. You can safely modify parts of the DOM that React has no reason to update. For example, if some div is always empty in JSX, React won't have a reason to touch its children list. Therefore, it is safe to manually add or remove elements here. So basically what it's saying here is that, like in our example, that's fine to do because we aren't modifying the DOM manually with refs. All we are doing is using the method on the ref to scroll into view. So we're not like adding DOM nodes to the page. But what you need to be careful about is modifying the DOM manually using refs, especially if React might modify similar parts of the DOM. It can result in, like it says here, inconsistent visual results or crashes. So before manually updating the DOM with refs, I would definitely read through this section of the docs and just make sure that you're being careful about it and kind of doing it correctly and not potentially introducing bugs with using refs in manual DOM manipulations. So to end here, let's actually just kind of go through this recap that they have in their docs. So refs are a generic concept, but you'll most likely use them to hold DOM elements, just like we did in our example. You instruct React to put a DOM node into myref.current by passing a ref attribute to a certain element, just like what I showed you with my section element. Usually you will use refs for non-destructive actions like focusing, scrolling, or measuring DOM elements. Like what we did, we used scrolling as an example. And then finally here, it also covers kind of what we covered earlier, avoid changing DOM nodes directly with refs that are already managed by React. And it says that if you do modify them, modify parts that React has no reason to update. So that is using refs with elements in React.js. Let me know if you have any questions below, but hopefully that makes things clear. You know, this probably shouldn't be your go-to solution for everything, but in a large application, I think you will find yourself needing to use refs at some point for certain functionality. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned how to use refs with elements, and I will see you in that next one.